Calvin Reeves was 41 years old, an operations director who had spent 14 years in supply chain logistics, building a reputation for one specific thing. He never missed a discrepancy. Not in a manifest, not in a routing plan, not in the small things that didn't add up the way they were supposed to. He drove a 7-year-old truck. He came home at the same time every evening. On a Monday in February, his wife Nadine told him she was pregnant. He said the right things. He held her. He stayed still through dinner and through the evening, until she was asleep, and then he sat in the kitchen in the dark, with a very specific number in his head. The number of weeks she said she was, and the number of weeks that didn't line up with the last time they had been that close. He had already been recording the calls for 6 weeks. He had 31 of them. He hadn't listened to all of them yet. He had been waiting to be sure of what he was looking at before he looked directly at it. She had no idea he had heard any of it. What happened next would cost her everything she had spent 7 months arranging. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen light was off at 2:17 in the morning when Calvin sat at the table with his phone and opened the audio folder with a purpose he hadn't allowed himself before that night. Calvin Reeves had spent 14 years in operations at Meridian Freight Solutions, working his way from a routing coordinator to the director overseeing 4 regional distribution centers across 3 states. He understood logistics at the level of someone who had spent years learning what happens when a single tracking error compounds through a system, how one number off at the origin point becomes an undeliverable shipment 400 miles later. He had a particular talent for noticing the first deviation before it compounded. His team knew this about him. His managers had built their trust in him around it. He drove a 2017 F-150 that ran clean because he maintained it. He wore a specific pair of steel-toed boots on site visits that he'd had resoled twice because they still fit right. He was the kind of man who kept his word like it was the only currency he had and had never once bounced a check on it. He and Nadine had been married for 7 years. He had paid off her car the spring after their wedding, not because she asked, because the interest rate was predatory, and he had the savings. He had co-signed her business loan for the boutique she opened on Hartwell Lane. He had spent 4 weekends gutting and rebuilding their kitchen himself so she could have the layout she had shown him in a magazine. He did these things without keeping score, because he was not a man who kept score. He was also a man who had set up the home's VoIP phone system in 2021, maintained the router it ran through, and had administrator access to every setting in it. When he noticed, in late December, that Nadine had been using the home line for calls she stepped outside to take, calls that ran 40 minutes, 60 minutes, calls she ended quickly when he came through a door. He spent one evening in his home office enabling call recording on the VoIP admin panel. His account. His system. His name on the service agreement. He had not listened to the first recording for 3 days after he made it. He had made himself wait until there were enough to see a pattern, not just a moment. He didn't know yet what the pattern would tell him. He just knew that something in the system was off. And he had learned a long time ago that the number that doesn't add up is always telling you something true. He would later mark that February evening, Nadine in the living room, her hands around his, the news delivered with careful warmth, as the moment he understood exactly how far what he'd been looking at actually went. The living room smelled of the candles she had lit. 3 of them, an arrangement he recognized as intentional. Nadine came out of the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea and set his in front of him the way she set things when she was preparing for a specific kind of conversation, carefully, with an intention underneath the gesture. She sat across from him. She had been crying, or had made her eyes look like she had. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to know it's good news." She told him she was pregnant. 8 weeks, she said. She had gone to the doctor that morning. She said his name and reached across the table. He looked at her. He took her hand. He said what a man says in that moment. He watched her face move through the relief of a performance, landing correctly. 8 weeks. He counted back. He had been in Atlanta for a logistics audit the week she named. He had been there for 11 days. He knew his own calendar. He knew the number. He didn't say any of that. He kept his hand in hers. He kept his face still. He noticed that her phone was face down on the side table, screened toward the wood, and had been since he sat down. He filed it. He held the warmth in the room for exactly as long as it needed to be held. After she went upstairs, he sat in the kitchen with the light off. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. He was doing what he had been trained by 14 years of operations work to do when a number didn't add up, going back to the origin point to find where the discrepancy had entered the system. He opened the audio folder. He pressed play on the first recording. 3 years before that evening, he had co-signed the business loan that opened Nadine's boutique on Hartwell Lane. She had needed a co-signer because her credit history was thin. 2 years out of graduate school, first business venture, no collateral of her own. He had signed without hesitation, because it was hers, and because he understood that some investments don't pay in money. The boutique had done well. She had built something real, and she had built it with her own work, and he had been proud of her for it, in the specific way he was proud of things that were hard. By the 2nd year of the business, she had started keeping her phone closer. He had told himself it was the stress of managing inventory, of tracking orders, of the particular anxiety a first business generates in the people running it. He had told himself this for longer than the evidence supported, because extending goodwill was his default setting, and because the alternative required him to look at something he hadn't yet decided to look at. His colleague and mentor, Dennis, had told him once that Calvin was the kind of manager who caught what other people rationalized away. "You read the manifest," Dennis had said. "Other people read the summary. That's the whole difference." Calvin had laughed. He hadn't thought of it as a compliment so much as a habit. He thought about that differently now. He had been reading the summary at home for 2 years. He had seen the figures. He had just been choosing not to run the audit. That was what she hadn't counted on. That when he finally ran it, he would be thorough. Her name was Vera Reeves. She was Calvin's father's older sister, 65 years old, retired after 27 years as a court reporter for the circuit court in Harlow County. Small, deliberate, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a plain chain she wore, whether she needed them or not. She had a habit of writing things down in small ruled notebooks that she kept on the shelf above her kitchen table. Dated on the cover, organized by year. She had 14 of them going back to 2009. She wrote down what she observed, and when she observed it, the way a person writes things down when they have spent 3 decades in courtrooms where written records are the only thing that holds. She had been watching since November. She had not said anything. Not because she didn't know. Because Calvin was not a man who asked for help before he had already tried to carry the thing himself, and she had been waiting for him to arrive at the point where he was ready to be helped. He called her at 9:18 on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the pregnancy announcement. He sat in his truck in the Meridian Freight parking lot and said, "Tell me what you have." "I'll need you to come to the house," she said, "and bring what you have. I need you to let me go through all of it before you say anything." He arrived at noon. She had her notebook open on the kitchen table. The first entry was dated November 3rd, a description of a blue Audi she had seen parked 2 houses down from Calvin's home on a Wednesday afternoon. She had written the plate number beside it. The second entry was 3 days later. The same plate. The same house. She had cross-referenced it. The plate was registered to a man named Terrence Gilmore. She had written his name in the margin in small, precise capital letters. There were 18 entries between November and February. The Audi, the times, the durations she had observed, the afternoon she saw Nadine and Terrence standing at the side door for 47 minutes before he left. All of it. "I didn't say anything," Vera said, "because I was waiting until there was enough to mean something. Now there's enough." Calvin opened his phone. He set it on the table. He pressed play on the recording dated January 14th. On the recording, Nadine was on the home phone. The call lasted 38 minutes. In the first 6, Terrence's voice was audible, lower than Calvin had expected, controlled, practiced. They had been talking for 14 months, the recordings established. 14 months of calls on the home line, 31 of them in the 6 weeks Calvin had been recording, and more before that he hadn't captured. 18 minutes into the January 14th recording, Nadine told him she was pregnant. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Then, Terrence asked whose it was. His voice was different in that silence. Not the controlled voice from the beginning of the call. Flatter, careful. She told him it didn't matter whose it was. She told him she had handled it. She used that word 3 times. Handled. She had not handled it. She was 8 weeks pregnant, still. On the Monday evening, she told Calvin. "There's more," Vera said. She turned to the second notebook. She had kept, separately, a folder of printed documents she had assembled over the previous month through public records and a contact at the county clerk's office. The life insurance policy, a $400,000 term policy Calvin had held since 2019, with himself and Nadine jointly named. She had the amendment filed in October, 6 weeks after what the call logs established was the month the pregnancy was confirmed. The amendment changed the beneficiary. Calvin's sister, who had been named as secondary beneficiary, was removed. A new sole primary beneficiary was designated. Nadine. Calvin had not been notified. He had not signed the amendment. The insurance company's records showed it had been processed through a broker Nadine had contacted directly. He was quiet for a long time. He stood over both notebooks and the printed documents, the way he stood over a problem at work that had compounded through the system, looking at all of it together, not any single piece. The November sightings. The call recordings. The January conversation where she told Terrence she had handled the pregnancy. The insurance amendment in October. The pregnancy reveal in February. The sequence was complete. Every line connected. Every number told the same story. On the recording from February 6th, 11 days before she told Calvin, Terrence's voice had been different. Back to controlled. He said, "Once it's registered, you're set. He'll carry the weight of it. Then we move when you're ready." He was going to be made to support, financially and legally, a child that was not his, as part of a plan the two of them had discussed in a house they did not know he could hear. He picked up his coffee mug. He set it down. He did not break anything. "I need to call Dennis Foy," he said. Vera said nothing. She refilled his coffee. He didn't move fast. That's what people never understand about this part. Dennis Foyer had been Calvin's personal attorney for 6 years, a methodical man who did not add drama to bad information. He called before 8 a.m., and when he called his voice was the same regardless of what he had to say. Calvin reached him that same Tuesday evening. Dennis listened without interrupting. When Calvin finished, he said, "Don't change anything she can see. I'll have everything reviewed by Thursday." He had the recordings authenticated by Thursday. He had a forensic accountant review the life insurance amendment and the joint accounts by the following Monday. What the accountant found added a third financial element. Between August and January, 6 transfers totaling $22. $400 had been moved from their joint savings account to a separate account registered in Nadine's name alone. Not a new account, one she had held before the marriage that had remained largely dormant. It had not been dormant since August. She had been building a position. On multiple fronts, quietly, while Calvin went to work at the same time every morning and came home at the same time every evening and had no idea any of it was happening. While Dennis was building the documentation, Nadine was planning what she believed was the next stage. She told Calvin the week after the announcement that she thought they should meet with a family attorney to discuss the practical matters: parental leave planning, the house, long-term financial planning for a family. She said it with the careful warmth of a woman who had decided how the next phase was going to go. He agreed. He suggested they meet that Thursday in a conference room with their respective attorneys present. He said he thought it made sense to have everything properly documented from the start. She agreed before he finished the sentence. He could hear the relief she kept almost entirely out of her voice. Vera was watching him from across the table when he ended the call. "She thinks this is already settled," Calvin said. Vera looked at him over her reading glasses. She said nothing. She refilled his coffee. Calvin arrived 35 minutes early, a routing director's habit. You don't manage a system from behind it. The conference room was on the 9th floor of Foe and Associates, a long table, pale walls, 2 windows looking east over the city. Dennis arrived at 7:50. He set 3 folders on the table, in the order they had agreed: the call recording summary, the insurance amendment documentation, and the financial transfer records, each folder labeled, each document in sequence. Nadine arrived at 8:32, 2 minutes late. Her attorney, a composed woman named Hartley, came in with her. They had a folder of their own: prenatal records, income projections, a preliminary asset inventory. The inventory Calvin had looked at once, last night, and recognized immediately from the July value on the joint accounts. The August transfers had not been included. The account they had gone into had not been listed. Nadine glanced at Calvin when she sat down. A brief professional assessment. Composed, she looked toward Dennis as if the meeting were already proceeding along the lines she had planned. Dennis opened with a single sentence: "Before we discuss any family planning matters, there are several items of documentation that need to be placed into the record and acknowledged by all parties." Hartley looked up from her folder. This was not the agenda she had been given. Dennis opened the first folder. He did not hurry. He laid documents on the table with the unhurried efficiency of a man who understood that the contents would do their own work. This is an authenticated summary of 31 recorded telephone calls made via the home VoIP line at 4411 Dunmore Drive, a line registered to Calvin Reeves, between December 14th and February 20th. Dennis paused. The recordings are in evidence. The summary documents dates, call durations, and the parties involved. The full audio is available. He let that sit. The calls establish an ongoing relationship between Mrs. Reeves and a third party spanning at minimum 14 months. Hartley set down her pen. She looked at her client once. Nadine's expression had not changed. She was working to keep it from changing, and that effort was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Calvin was watching closely enough. Dennis placed the second document. On January 14th of this year, a call was recorded in which Mrs. Reeves disclosed a pregnancy to the third party. The third party's response, and Mrs. Reeves's subsequent statements, specifically the statement that she had, quote, handled it, are part of the authenticated record. He was precise. The prenatal records she provided this morning confirmed the pregnancy is ongoing. She had not, in fact, handled it. The room was very still. Hartley reached for the summary. She read it. She did not look up. Dennis placed the third folder. In October of last year, the beneficiary designation on a $400,000 life insurance policy was amended. Calvin Reeves was not notified of this change and did not authorize it. The amendment processing records are enclosed. He turned to the next page. In addition, 6 transfers totaling $22,400 were made from the joint savings account between August and January to a separate account not disclosed in the financial inventory provided this morning. The transfer records and destination account documentation are enclosed. Nadine's attorney had stopped taking notes. Something moved across Nadine's face that wasn't fear exactly. It was the specific expression of a person watching a system they built to run in one direction suddenly running in the opposite one. The moment where the routing they planned encounters the manifest they didn't know existed. The silence lasted 9 seconds. Calvin counted them. Dennis said, "We'll allow a few minutes for review." Calvin stood. He had brought one folder. It had done what it was there to do. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Dennis's hand. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back to Nadine. He said it quietly, not for the attorneys, for her. "You needed me to be the last person in this room to know. I made sure I was the first." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The divorce was filed in March. The financial irregularities, the insurance amendment, the undisclosed transfers were addressed in the settlement process and reversed or factored into the division of assets accordingly. Paternity proceedings were handled through the legal system, properly and on the record. Calvin did not involve himself in those proceedings beyond what the law required of him. That was not his to carry, and he knew it. Terrence Gilmore did not attend any proceedings. He had, by early April, retained his own attorney for a matter unrelated to the divorce. The plan that had been discussed on the recording from February 6th, the one about carrying the weight, had not survived contact with documentation. Nadine moved into a rental near Hartwell Lane. The boutique stayed open. She ran it the way she had always run it, with her own work, her own hours, her own competence. Calvin had not interfered with any part of that. He had co-signed the loan for the business, and the business was hers. The distinction mattered to him. She was carrying the weight of what she had chosen the way a person carries something they cannot put down. Not publicly, just steadily, every day, in the particular way of someone who knows what they did and cannot unknow it. Calvin transferred back to the Harlow office in April, closer to where he had grown up, closer to Vera, closer to the distribution center he had come up in. Dennis Foy finalized the last of the paperwork in May. By June, Calvin had put in for a regional director position he had been passing on for 2 years because the timing wasn't right. The timing was right now. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. He did not talk about what had happened with people who hadn't been there. He did not need to. Vera sent him something in the mail the week the divorce finalized. Not a note. A small framed photograph she had taken on the last day of his father's life. Calvin at 22, standing beside his father in the Harlow freight yard. both of them in work boots, looking at something beyond the frame. On the back, in Vera's court reporter handwriting, he would have been proud of how you handled it. Calvin put it on the bookshelf in the front room. He looked at it sometimes. Not because he needed reminding, because she had written it for him, and it deserved to be seen. On a June evening, Calvin sat on the back steps of the house on Dunmore Street, the house he had stayed in, the house that was his outright now, the kitchen he had rebuilt over 4 weekends, still holding together exactly as he had built it. He had a glass of water. The sky was going from orange to dark along the western edge of the neighborhood. He thought about the man who had sat in that same kitchen in February at 2 in the morning with his phone on the table and a number in his head that didn't add up. He thought about what that man had done next, not in anger, not in haste, but with the same deliberate attention he had given to 14 years of work that mattered. He thought about that man and recognized him. He also recognized that the man sitting on the steps in the June evening was the same man, just standing on a foundation he had now confirmed could hold. The neighborhood was settling into night. He could hear the couple 2 doors down on their front porch and, somewhere further, a lawnmower finishing its last pass. He went inside. He turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.